So I get to work in Colorado because I believe what the Independence Institute can do is save Colorado. And all across the nation, there are think tanks and organizations that work with us and work in their states. And then there are think tanks on the national level that are trying to do things in Washington. And for a long time, I kind of thought that was the world. But lo and behold, some 25 years ago, when I ran into an organization called the Atlas Network, I realized there are other people living in other countries who might want some freedom. Brad Lips became one of my good friends who runs the Atlas Network. Thanks for being.
No, so glad to be here, John.
So I'm going to say it this way. I'm hacked off about what's going on in America. I'm hacked off about cancel culture and taxes and monetary policy, this, that, and the other thing. People hate my guts. Never once in my 3 decades of free market activism, liberty activism, have I ever worried that I might be taken away in the middle of the night and just disappear.
Right.
A lot of the think tanks that you work with through the Atlas Network, that you help, that you advise, even help fund sometimes, that's not always a given, is it?
Right, and that is one of the things that makes this work really inspiring, to know that every day, think tank work sounds pretty sleepy, but we get to work with incredibly heroic people, and it doesn't happen every day, but one live example is friends that had been running the Afghanistan Economic and Legal Studies Organization, and they're not doing that right now. But the struggle to get them out of Kabul, to get some funds for their friends that couldn't make it out, and to have them now working to figure out how they can reactivate some of the programs they were running, these radio programs.
Incredible.
It was nerve-wracking in late August, but there was a happy ending for at least the key guys that we've been working with for a dozen years.
As we fight to protect our liberty from it eroding more, there are these people all over the world who are fighting in the opposite direction, that they are in the worst positions, and they're taking these chances to try to get the word out and to talk to people and take control. In Eastern Europe, some of the people I've met through you have just been heroic in this. You do work in South America. Give me an example of, if not for Atlas helping out in this one region, this might not have happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the most heart-wrenching stories are the ones that don't have a happy ending at this point, and I guess I'm sort of feeling compelled to share about our friends in Venezuela. There's an organization called CEDICE, and that they have maintained their work, under the worst circumstances, with the country absolutely falling apart, with a tyranny that drove many of their board members, distinguished businessmen, out of the country. They still persist and provide intellectual ammunition to the still alive political opposition there to Maduro. But one thing that it's really interesting is that I have a brother who also has labored in the freedom movement and was actually doing stuff, I think in Colorado with AFP back in the day.
That's Americans for Prosperity.
Americans for Prosperity, and they were working on those Tabor amendments, trying to control the growth of government. I remember my brother kind of walking away from a conversation with our Venezuelan friends, and he said, "Man, like these guys are like it feels like Captain Von Trapp trying to figure out if he has to, leave through the Alps and escape." But he said that when they asked him what he did, and he explained, trying to control government spending so it goes, this slope and not that slope. They said, don't minimize the importance of what you're doing here in the States. That if we lose it in the United States, we're going to lose it everywhere. So all these battles are important. I think it's a fun takeaway.
I took when we were fighting Obamacare, and there was a push here in Colorado, is I went up to Vancouver with a group of folks and met with people who are survivors of the Canadian healthcare system. And many of them have come down here. And the stories are heart-wrenching. They've come down here for care. Mm-hmm. One woman I met spent 3 years sleeping in a chair because she was waiting for her hip surgery. Yep. I met a woman young woman who needed a spinal fusion, not that serious. I mean, it's a big deal, but they kept putting it off. They put her on morphine. She got addicted. Mm-hmm. She couldn't take care of her kids. She became incontinent. They gave her morphine like they were M&Ms. Mm-hmm. And for 3 years, she said, I wasn't a mother.
Yeah.
Until finally somebody blessed me to do this. I talked to the guy who brokered the deals with the doctors down here to get these surgeries done. And he said, whatever you do, don't do in America what we've done in Canada. And I thought he was going to say, because it would really suck for you. But he said, because if you do, we'll have no place to escape to.
Right.
That still gives me shivers.
Yeah, it's a poignant line. I think that there's a great Ronald Reagan speech where he says the same thing about Cuban businessmen, where Reagan said, we really take a lot for granted here in the States, and the Cuban said, you shouldn't be feeling lucky for what you have. I feel lucky for what you have because it's our only escape valve, and that's important.
How many countries does Atlas work in?
Yeah, it's about 100, where we have independent partners that all call their own shots. We don't control any of them, but they all take inspiration, the training, sometimes some funding for their projects from us.
It's an amazing thing in that the same way that I share best practices with people I know in other states, their situations are different. The same thing applies across boundaries. Talk to me a little bit about poverty. In that, I believe one of the dangers of the success of capitalism is it could be the end of capitalism, because we live so luxuriously that we're willing to give it away. We worry about wild things, and we forget that there's abject poverty around the world. You guys have tried to attack a lot of this head on, not with theoretical white papers, but actually by measuring, can we help these people? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, it really does begin with the local vision of partners who have knowledge about their communities that we're never going to possess. One of the real interesting mind shifts that I think has been going on, and I like to think we've been a leader in this, is helping people appreciate that a lot of the top-down approaches to solving poverty abroad, sort of the development economics model of many decades, has been creating more corruption and more problems than it's been actually solving. So we have challenged a lot of our partners. We said, we know that economic prosperity correlates with economic freedom, and there's a variety of indices that measure economic freedom. Look at where your country is doing poorly. How can you affect policy change that'll move it up in those rankings, knowing that that correlates to more economic growth and reductions in poverty? So in India, one of the great insights that a group called the Center for Civil Society had was that they had a minimum capital requirement required of all businesses, which meant that before you could open an even modest business, you needed to get some bureaucrat to stamp a paper that showed you have enough rupee in your bank account to legally operate.
Think about that. You want to start a newspaper stand, and so you're going to need to have enough money to put up the stand, and you've got to go begging to the government for permission to risk your life savings on this business, when if it fails, you're the only one who's hurt. If it succeeds, you help people because you deliver the news to them, but also you hire people and it helps the economy. But you have to go hat in hand and ask some technocrat, may I please risk my own future and my own time to help India be better?
Exactly. So that was exactly what existed, and the Center for Civil Society raised awareness that is not how it operates in the rest of the world, that the best person to know whether you should open your business is the entrepreneur that's going to take the financial risk, and they were able to get that abolished. So, one of the, there's many impediments to people participating in the formal economy in India, and not just operating sort of in the underground economy, but one of them has disappeared thanks to Center for Civil Society. And we think that those little incremental changes are much more important than the sort of the top-down approach of just, give people fish for a day, basically.
It's also a difficult thing for a lot of funders who understand where we want to go, to understand incremental changes build upon themselves.
Right.
We didn't get into this position with the United States turning into a socialist country, a couple years ago. No, this is a nearly 100-year march of incremental change, and when you can do that in these countries, the incremental change not only helps the next victory, it actually helps people. You get to see them, you get to talk to them. How much time does your staff and you spend abroad?
Well, it's obviously been a little different during COVID times, but we have staff that are traveling more than 50% of the time. We really make an effort to be present in the lives of our partners and to be good custodians of the donor dollars that we're able to help.
Where's the scariest place you went?
See, I don't have the crazy
All right,
stories.
Give me the crazy story you heard from one of your staff, because I've heard them, and you've been in some weird things happen, and these are not always places you call the cops when something weird happens.
Yeah, I mean, so my colleague Tom Palmer, for a long time at Cato Institute, with us for the last 12 years, used to smuggle copiers behind and fax machines behind the Iron Curtain to pro-democracy folks in Ukraine and elsewhere. He was hit by, I guess, a shrapnel from an explosion when he was in Baghdad back in 2004 or 5, something around those lines. So Tom was really a pioneer in helping us develop a network of folks that spoke Arabic and Kurdish and so on.
By the way, what a resource to have. I'm always impressed when I spend time with him how he knows not just the egghead economic view, but actually knows what's going on the ground in these different places. I mean, you've got a remarkable crew of people.
Yeah, and Tom in particular is a guy who goes deep in sort of the philosophical history of our movement and knows some of the thinkers. He sort of has this refrain that every culture has a culture of liberty if you look deep enough, and that it's really important for us.
That sounds too optimistic for me. I hate that.
but I think it's really important for us to learn how to anchor the ideas that we care about and not have them considered Western ideas. Most of the horrible philosophers throughout history, Marx and so on, are sort of Western philosophers. We need to show these are universal values, and that's part of what we think we're able to do through the different partners we work with at Atlas Network.
I can always tell when somebody has too much time on their hands and are too full of themselves because they have to write a book. It's such an obnoxious thing. Oh, by the way, I've got my new book is out. And by the way,
I'm nothing if not obnoxious.
Literate people. I mean, not only do you know how to read. So tell me actually why you needed to write the book about liberalism in a free society. This was. You talk a lot about the Atlas Foundation, but you really dive into a few things. Why?
Yeah, so during COVID, I was not traveling as much as I typically do, and I originally was thinking it would be nice to summarize some of the accomplishments of what our movement has done as Atlas was approaching its 40th anniversary. But there we were, and instead of doing something really about the past, the book that I wrote is much more about the future, and really believing that we all know we've been in this health crisis. It's not understood that we are in a freedom crisis. And there are times in history, 1776, 1917, you can kind of rattle them off, where history shifted in a particular direction. And I hate that the conventional wisdom seems to be emerging that post-2020, we are going to be less free than we were back in 2019. And I wrote this book to say this is not preordained, and there's a way to push against that.
When you say it's not give me more detail. What is not preordained? Because I feel it, and I think a lot of people have that sense of, the great definition of pornography. I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it. And people right now, there is an underlying angst that is, I feel it everywhere. I talk to everyone about it. They know something is very, very wrong, and even if they're not politically attuned or monetarily attuned, they know something's going on. So when you say it's not too late to change it, give me some meat.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of different policy areas where I think things have been heading in the wrong direction for some time, but I think that it's really defeatist if we look at a trend line and say, I guess we're going that direction. One thing we should take heart from is that the trend line actually means that there's more awareness of the problems than ever before. And I would argue, and do in the book, that there's a real opportunity for new coalitions of people of goodwill to come together and to realize that there are some some things that maybe used to push us apart that now look pretty minor. And that as we become more polarized, I mean, we can still disagree about tax policy and so on. But when cancel culture is running amok among the left, I think there's a lot of people on the center left that are uncomfortable with the authoritarians in their midst. I know there's people.
But also because of Atlas's experience, you know what cancel culture leads to. You know, you made a joke about you can say we've seen the gulags, but cancel culture is an economic threat. It's a livelihood threat. It's real. So I think there are a lot of people in other parts of the country looking in America, going, "Do you not know what?
Yeah, do you not
know what happens next?"
Right.
Yeah. Talk to me about how you measure some of these things. One of the biggest questions you and I always get is, well, how do you measure your success? Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's a good question. Here in Colorado, have we protected the taxpayers? Have we expanded liberty? Have we protected it from this onslaught that has come in with the demographic change and the progressive takeover? It's like, yeah, we have. Yours, you got to look at a whole globe. How do you measure?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right, that is a challenge that you have to kind of, in some ways, measure in a more granular way. Are we being effective here and there? Mm-hmm. But there are tools that I think have been really helpful at making the case for why the kind of work that we're engaged in is important. I mentioned earlier that you know that there's more economic growth when you have more economic freedom. And groups like Fraser Institute in Canada has created a wonderful index that helps measure the extent to which economic freedom exists. One of the things that, if it's going to be much easier for me to sell the value of Atlas Network, and this is my holy grail, I'd love to be able to prove, we have some of the equation, economic growth correlates with economic freedom. Economic freedom is tied to economic mentality. And think tanks and our do tank partners are part of increasing economic mentality. So one of the things that's in the book is this new index. Cato Journal actually published the academic version of this paper today it's called the Global Index of Economic Mentality, which looks at some long-running surveys, which have a lot of different questions, but there's some that drill down on how people think about the economy. And we can kind of, now it's a pretty blunt instrument.
The nerd in me is fascinated by this, because it's really hard to measure what people are thinking. And there are surveys, and you don't know if they're being honest. One of my favorite ones right now is that, of course, we've never been more divided, that race is a bigger issue and more divisive than it's ever been. But you look at the census numbers and go, well, wait a second. Interracial marriages just continue to explode at an exponential rate. Right. People hate each other's race so much that they're making babies together, mm-hmm. and those babies are, breeding is going to take care of race over time. And so the narrative that you hear from the left and the facts just don't always jive. But the idea that we're in a culture war, and your job, my job, is to get people to value personal and economic freedom. That that you're not free if somebody can tell you you don't own what you own, or you can't do with what you own what you want to do. You can't use your money to make that newspaper stand in India.
Right.
So how do you measure it? Who's doing well? Who's doing poorly?
Yeah. Well, so this index of economic mentality takes sort of a global view, and I believe it's really the first attempt to measure what needs to be measured in more precise ways. So this is a sort of a blunt instrument to look at how different countries right now are valuing the freedoms that we think are really important to a more prosperous economy. When it comes to actually measuring the impact of think tanks, we have struggled to find a common denominator, because the organizations we work with in so many different settings, with so many different target markets, sometimes they're looking at the youth, sometimes they're looking at policymakers, sometimes they think they can get particular reforms done, other times they're looking at broad-based economic education. We haven't found a common denominator behind their work, but what we have realized is actually maybe more important is that we've come up with ways to make all these people that work in this area feel connected and to learn from one another and to aspire to catch up with those who are really excelling. So we see that our the way you said, sometimes you know it when you see it about
and also
porn and bad times. We know it when we see great think tank work.
You don't know it until you're in it. The Malcolm Gladwell book, with 10,000 hours, I forget what
Outliers.
Outliers. The idea that you pick up a sense because you're been in it so long, this is happening and it's wrong, that's happening and it's wrong. Right. This is you know that, and it comes with experience. The outside of that is laws need to change. And awareness needs to change. And that awareness, the mentality, you have weapons now that the founders of Atlas never had. You guys went dark because of COVID, and we were still able to communicate. Mm-hmm. We were still able to communicate and have meetings with our partners on the other side of the globe. Right. When some of your board members were out there translating, Atlas Shrugged or other things into different languages, they had to send out pieces of paper. Right. That's really changing somehow. Is it getting easier, or is it just getting more diffused?
Yeah, well, I think that you've put your finger on it. That when I think about what's changed over the 2+ decades that I've been involved in, it's like we moved from an era of information scarcity to one of information abundance. Yeah. And there's been this incredible democratization of how you communicate with people on all fronts.
In most places.
In most places, but the idea, you've been a leader in this with, TV shows and video production and podcasts and so on. The rest of the world's catching up real fast, and it's an amazing thing to see. That it used to be that people thought that the end game was publishing something intellectually coherent that would stand the test of time. Now they realize that that the challenge is not sacrificing any of that quality and rigor, but to get it noticed, and that's different.
Even things like social media, which is the great evil, but at the same time, you see messages that get through. My daughter is addicted to TikTok, and so it's like, Dad, check this out, and she's conservative, which is awful. I'm libertarian. The fights are wonderful, but I'm so proud of her. And she shows me these quick little videos that other conservatives do around the country, and they're hysterical. I mean, these are 18-year-old kids putting together a sharp message in under 30 seconds, and it goes out and it's seen by hundreds of thousands of people, and it costs nothing. And it makes me realize we got to change how we communicate. But it's also changing without us, as long as we keep the ideas out there and easy for them to access.
Yeah, well, one of the great innovations that I saw first from an Indonesian think tank, they were working on the challenge of getting rid of protectionist trade policy that was driving up the cost of rice and other food staples. They said, there's no reason why Indonesians should need to only consume locally Indonesian-grown rice when it's not cost-effective. People who are super poor are paying way too much of their monthly check for food that they could get cheaper. So they're trying to get rid of these trade policies. Who did they turn to? They got the most popular YouTube celebrities of Indonesia, who would do anything for $1, and they realized that they're much more influential than if you got Brad Pitt or whoever from our generation.
There's also kind of a disconnect between the donor class who genuinely wants to see these changes and the younger folks who can make these changes happen, but it's not seen in the same way. Here, I'll give you my example. We'll fight a tax increase, and there'll be people who invest in it, and they'll say, well, where's our television commercial? I've been watching TV, I haven't seen a television commercial. And my sense is, dude, I know how you're going to vote. Yeah. If you see your commercial, it's only because I'm spending your money to make you happy by putting it on a Bronco game. That's not, what we did is we found the 250 swing voters. We're talking to them, we're bringing them along through all sorts of these means, but there's that kind of, you don't see it. Fortunately, you've got a staff and you've got a board of directors. Your chairwoman is just terrific. I think they kind of understand that they might not see every little thing, but they know what's going on.
Yeah, and I think that the really healthy thing that's going on in our community writ large is that people are leaning into these challenges of making sure that we're really relevant, and that it's not about protecting one's turf the way that I think it used to be, and that that's part of what I hate about sort of the academic culture. That it's really these little turf battles over such small things. I think that there's a real genuine desire to change lives, and people realize that you do that better by cooperating. And if you're the only game in town, that's actually a pretty sad state of affairs. You need friendly competition and collaborators all around. So I love that there's a sense of discontent and urgency that I hope more people come to feel, because freedom's fragile, and we're in a dangerous time.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Americans' lack of knowledge about what goes over there, what happens over there. We talked a little bit about, how much we love Che Rivera. He's, wow, what a great guy. And, no, not really. You're wearing a T-shirt with him, but you ought to know the real story. And in the same way, we don't really know what goes on in these other places. You had a meeting, and I was privileged to be there in Lithuania. And the most memorable part of that was taking a tour of the police station there. Now, it says police station. It was a police station that the Russians and Soviets used, and then when the Nazis took over, they used that police station, and then afterwards, the Reds used the police station again. It's not a police station. It was a torture center to interrogate and destroy and kill people. And to see the chambers they used to torture people to get information out of them, where they would just disappear. The cells, I looked at one, and there was a cell that was caved in on the floor. There was a little foot diameter plate that was kind of sticking up about a foot. I was like, well, that's very odd. Well, because they fill it with ice water, the guy stands on it for days. If he falls, he'll catch pneumonia, he'll die. And so what got me was seeing the kind of in the basement, these peepholes that would look out at the street, and if people would stop and look at it, they would grab those people, because those people were obviously, maybe, have a loved one who's there, and then they would torture that person for information, and people would just get taken up. And we have no sense of how fragile our freedom is. And to see this place like Lithuania and these other places that have been brutalized this way, we have an arrogance. Maybe that's why I'm saying. Here in America, we have an arrogance that we've solved those problems. That could never happen here.
Yeah.
Could it?
Yeah, no, I think that we need to be constantly aware of how we're not invulnerable to the same dysfunction that can happen when you expand the power of the state, when you embrace a mindset that I think has been growing, where you're not seeing your political rivals as rivals with good intentions, but as an enemy to be destroyed. Right. We shouldn't think of ourselves as invulnerable and have this idea that it can't happen here. I think that some of our friends in Hong Kong will tell you that they had a sense that it couldn't happen there for a long time, and the past 7 years was sort of a wake-up call, but maybe a wake-up call that came too late.
I think it has come too late, and I to see there needs to be an airlift out of Hong Kong. This wasn't supposed to happen. Even if you go through, they're supposed to have another 25 years. I forget what it is.
Right.
Doesn't matter. The United States isn't going to do anything about it. Britain's not going to do anything about it. Nobody's going to stand up, and these people will. It does break my heart. And it's little things. And we have mandates for a vaccine. I'm pro-vaccine, but the idea of a government mandate that you must put a chemical compound into your bloodstream. If we accept this as a reasonable mandate, what else do we accept?
Right. I think that the thing that's been disturbing for me throughout COVID is that my natural reaction is to have a lot of humility about how little we know, how much we're all grappling to try to understand data relating to a threat nobody anticipated 18 months ago. And you'd think that would mean we should all have a little bit of goodwill towards each other and give people room to navigate it as best they can, especially when we've had some of these big course corrections in what the official advice has been. But
masks are bad, masks are good.
Yeah, but the certainty that everybody who's not paying attention to what's being advised right now and falling in line is a heretic is just crazy. A free society benefits from the resilience that comes from different viewpoints.
You were talking about the mentality of freedom. Talk to me about the mentality of freedom in this country. Mm-hmm. How free do people feel? Do they sense it? How do you measure it? Is there a difference between people in different areas, different ages? What?
Well, yeah. So one of the findings in this global index of economic mentality was that, good news, the United States is in the top 5 as number 4 overall in this measurement of appreciating the free enterprise system. But there's no country that has as big a negative divide between the older generation, that's you, me, and everybody over 40.
Speak for yourself.
And the younger generation, under 40, the kids are leaning socialist. They don't get it.
Let me shoot this back to you, make sure I understand what you're telling me. Overall, we're doing pretty well. People in America have a mentality towards capitalism and freedom. Good. But when you look at the young people, there's not a country that has a bigger divide. It's the old people who understand freedom. It's the young people who embrace socialism. That is terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying. Why is that?
Yeah, well, my hypotheses are that we suffer from our own successes, and people sort of think that there's sort of a luxury belief that they don't think that their own well-being is at stake. They still assume that they're going to be able to afford the $200 sneakers that they want. They don't understand that is only possible because of this sophisticated, spontaneous order that happens in a free society that allows us to produce incredible wealth. They sometimes don't know that socialism has been tried in many different varieties throughout the last 100 years, and those who have embraced it to its full extent have been train wrecks that have destroyed
any command and control economy, whether it's a feudal lord or it's fascism or it's communism. It's all done the same thing, but they don't see that, and it might be. So, I'm 57 years old. I feel much, much older. I remember, for instance, inflation, but I was in high school. Right. It was Dad's problem. I was chasing skirts, and he's freaking out. So nobody my age or younger has any idea of what inflation does and how it ravages an economy. And inflation is purely a monetary, that is government-made phenomenon. I think of people my age. I didn't go to Vietnam. I didn't get drafted. I didn't have a draft. They stopped it before. Right. So we did not know the hardship of that. We have not been through economic turmoil. We haven't been through the Great Depression. We haven't been through a true financial collapse. People my age and younger, life has been good. And I'm glad about that. I'm really, really glad about that. And I look at my kids, and you look at your kids, and you go, God, what are we leaving you? And how can we leave you so, how to put it, ignorant of the trap that's right in front of you, the debt bomb, the socialistic mindset, all these things, and it really it can really depress me if I spend much time on it.
Yeah. Well, there may be a refresher course in inflation coming. And other problems that will make people wake up to what they shouldn't take for granted. But you don't want to wish for restoring the republic as a basis of the pendulum swinging so wrong that we have to do a big reset. So I do think that there's reasons to be optimistic, and I take optimism from seeing all the parents that have been energized to correct problems they see in government schools, because during COVID the tide went out and they got to see some of the really horrific problems that we should have been paying attention to for a long time, but now we see the energy. So our challenge, I think, is people that love the values of a free society, is to help people wake up before it's too late, before we are going to have to pay the price of some really bad times. But you're telling me
the pig in the snake is not looking good. That is, the younger generation...
The pig in the snake.
Well, the idea is that a pig eats a snake and you can see the whole thing, it just moves. It's a demographic thing. I'm sorry I have to explain these simple things to you, but that if these kids, these young people, think that socialism is a good thing because we can just pay for everything. I mean, and we have. We're just printing up dollar bills. It's not a big deal. That's a bad thing, and it's going to explode. And what we are doing to them and our kids and our grandkids is it's not just criminal; it's immoral.
Yeah. Well, I do think that one of the things that I'd want...
Be more pessimistic. I need you to be more pessimistic. I don't want to be alone.
No, but don't you think that some of the attraction to socialism as a word simply is because people don't fully understand what they're agreeing to, and they have this sense that socialism is sharing and capitalism is the opposite, so it must mean hoarding and
price gouging.
And I think that our big challenge is that to just communicate better, because when people love entrepreneurs, they dream about their own successes and becoming YouTube stars and so on.
Although there is this kind of weird, perhaps only American phenomenon of we love to build people up so we could destroy them. And that there was a time where we looked at Henry Ford, who I believe did more for economic, not physical, mobility than any human being in American history. That he gave power to working people to live where they could afford and work where they could make the most and direct their own lives. If that guy came today, he would be vilified. So Jeff Bezos is a gazillionaire, and everybody hates him. But during COVID, my folks were pretty old. They were able to get things from Amazon and not have to go out. That could have saved their lives. I'm glad you're a gazillionaire for the value that you've added to me. And this idea that we demonize risk-taking, that we demonize success instead of celebrating it is really... I did not see that in my youth.
Yeah, but maybe that has grown over time, and I think that maybe part of the challenge is in an age where there's a lot of economic incentive. It's sort of what works with the algorithms of social media. There's incentive to play to people's sense of anger and envy. That maybe that's part of why we're seeing an uptick. And I fundamentally think that there's a reason why. That was one of those 10 commandments about
not being envious,
coveting, and so on.
I've coveted your wife for a long time and been pretty clear about that.
I wasn't sure if we're going to go there, but
we're just waiting for the right time. Talk to Stephanie about it. You've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing this for a long time. You're still energized by it? I got to say that there's sometimes I have my days, but I believe in what we do so strongly. I've never not wanted to wake up and get to it. Where are you on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have the benefit of maybe attention deficit disorder.
Yeah, right here.
And the fact that the work that we do at Atlas Network does have us on a daily basis in contact with a good cross-section of the 500 groups we work with. And there's always reasons to look at the glass as half empty, but there's also a lot of encouraging things that make me think that the glass is half full. And when you think about, as you pointed out early in the conversation here, the odds that some of them are facing, it doesn't give you much of an excuse to be pessimistic and to do a big woe is me. When you think about the incredible blessings that we live with in this country, it should make us more determined to pass on this amazing heritage that sustains this kind of free society.
I'm also grateful that you and I are able to do what we do. Mind you, if anybody realized that I have no employable skills, I got to make this scam work, as long as I can. I get to do this, and I get to do this. I get to anger socialists. I get to protect liberty in Colorado. I get to meet incredible people, and you've helped me connect with so many of them, and it's I love it, and I feel so terrible for people who hate their jobs, and I don't understand it, and I worry that with this entitlement world, more people will hate their jobs.
Yeah, that's why we have to spread the good news, Jon. Yeah. So can I tell you, I found a letter that I wrote when I was initially coming to DC. Sure.
Oh yeah, you need a little.
Got it. So I had a short-lived career. I went to business school. I lucked into a position at Smith Barney. I was being paid much better than I deserved at the time, and
like you aren't now.
Well, I decided that at that point, when I was 26 years old, I was becoming really passionate about public policy topics that I'd never really bothered to study in school. This is like a late dawning that happened for me, and I wrote some letters to relatives and friends that I thought could help me network in DC, and one of them saved that letter and sent it to me some years ago. And the way that I explained what I wanted to do was I said that what I wrote in 1997 was, I think that some really important history is going to be written over my working lifetime, and if we're going to sustain a free society, it's going to take some real work, and I want to be next to the good guys in that really important endeavor, and that certainly has come true, and being part of a community that really has the highest ideals, and they're pretty fun to work with. It's a real blessing.
Actually, we double down on that because it's the bourbon talking. So my Venn diagram kind of goes between ideas and politics. Kind of goes between politics and media and stuff. But I got to tell you, in politics, I don't like that many people. Mm-hmm. Even people who are on our side, sometimes they're part of a consultant class, and but the folks I've met on the ideological side, the people who are drawn to this as a mission, not a job, not for the fun of the fight, but because in their soul they know that what's going on is wrong, and that to coerce people to do things against their will is, for me, the highest immoral there is. Right there, it is the most evil, and it's amazing to see how many great people with different life experiences, different countries, different classes, different statuses, and it's just amazing to find the funders who see it, down to the guy in Nicaragua who's trying to make the ends meet. It's just, it's been beautiful to feel you're not alone.
Yeah, and that's why it's really energizing to be a part of it, and it's a challenge because we need the politicians at the end of the day to help execute this. So we wouldn't want to shortchange our allies there. But I love.
And there are a lot of brave ones.
Yeah. And I think that's the point. We need brave ones, but we can't expect them to be brave.
Right, exactly.
So that one of the great quotes from Milton Friedman was, he said something along the lines of, I don't think our challenge is to elect the right people. We need it to be politically profitable for the wrong people to do the right thing.
Exactly.
So if we don't do that, then even the right people are probably going to do the wrong thing, or they're going to get voted out of office when they do the right thing.
I mean, I think about where we are right now, and that around the Colorado Capitol, there are all these buildings, brick and mortar buildings, that are owned and run by the left, And so good people go to that Capitol, and 24/7 they see this. It's kind of like what happens in D.C. And we at Independence, we're Omaha Beach. At least there's one place there that says, no, you can't do it. Remember when you were a good guy and you wouldn't vote for this kind of stuff? Yeah, we need to keep them.
Yeah.
Did you ever meet Milton Friedman?
I did.
So did I. I had breakfast with him.
Did you?
Yeah.
I have a pretty good Milton Friedman story, if
Let's
you want to hear it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I first was enamored by Ayn Rand as sort of my entree into this world. And it used to be when you before YouTube, there was a catalog, Laissez-Faire Books.
Laissez-Faire Books.
And I ordered an Ayn Rand a video. It was like her on the Donahue show.
Yep.
But
which you now can see on YouTube for free.
Which you now can see for free.
Yeah.
But one thing that was great was that when you bought the video back in the day, you had Donahue with Ayn Rand, and then also Donahue with Milton Friedman. And he was much more persuasive than Ayn Rand ever was on that show anyway. And on that show, he began the Phil Donahue interview by explaining why he had an Adam Smith tie. And it motivated me to go out and get an Adam Smith tie. And when I first joined Atlas, Milton spoke for our 20th anniversary. We're now celebrating our 40th. And my job at the time was to be the bouncer that essentially got Milton back to his car. So he's like, I'll speak for you, but lots of people are going to want pictures with me. That's nice, but I can't do it anymore. I'm too old. Get me to my car. So I focused on getting him to the car without, just I'm single-minded trying to do my job. And as he gets into the car, he was actually wearing the same tie that he was wearing in 1976 and saw that I was too. And it's like, oh, we've got the same tie. But I was too slow-witted to explain that he was the reason I got the tie. So,
well, because you're slow and kind of dumb-witted, my Milton Friedman story goes like this. I've actually met him a couple times at different speeches, but never got a chance to talk with him. And this, so many years ago, my wife and I and two kids, back when I was married, that's how long ago it was, we were on the big island in Hawaii, and we're slumming it, going to little B&Bs, and finally let's go to the really nice hotel. For the last 2 nights, so we went to the Mauna Kea.
Oh.
Yeah, and just go crazy. They give us the key, go to the elevator, press the elevator door, and it opens. And inside are 2 of the smallest people I've ever seen. And I said, anybody ever tell you guys look like Milton Rose Friedman? That's. And we laughed. We ended up having breakfast the next day, and I was amazed how much he knew about Colorado politics, how much he knew about the Taxpayer Bill of Rights here.
Interesting.
It was just wonderful.
That's a great story.
Yeah. And Rose hit on me.
Yeah.
But it was. It's great to have those guys. Who is that today?
Yeah, that's a great question.
When he did the Free to Choose series, what was that, in the 80s? I'm trying to recall.
Yeah,
he became a cultural phenomenon about who we are and the philosophy of individual empowerment. Before that, Ayn Rand, because she put her philosophy into stories that were accessible. And I'm trying to think, who are those people now? We've got John Stossel, who does a great job, but that's one thing.
Yeah.
We've got some terrific economists out there, but I don't see a popular political or philosophical person. There's some on the social right. There's Jordan Peterson and others, but I don't see that libertarian guy who's out there saying, here's why government is wrong, and takes away the spark that is humanity.
Yeah, well, I think that I would make the case that this is, in part, a function of how fragmented our media and entertainment is. It used to be when U2 released a record, we all knew that a U2 record was coming out.
You said U2, but by the way, that's the bourbon. U2.
I said YouTube.
You said YouTube.
Oh my God! You said we could edit parts of this, right?
You were not editing that. Not if you paid me would I edit that.
But there used to be things that were kind of like cultural events.
Right.
I don't know that happens anymore. And I don't think it's just because I'm an old man. I think it's just because we don't have a common culture where we all agree, like, this is important.
This is one of my favorite topics. All right, and we're going too long, and thank God for bourbon. If I said Lucy on a conveyor belt of chocolates,
right,
would you know what that meant?
I do know that.
Exactly.
Yes.
If I said, beam me up, Scotty, would you know what that meant?
Yep.
Right. And today, there are so many niches. By the way, it's a good thing. It's a good thing that you can program your own world, but we do miss, who is Groucho Marx, who is Glenn Miller, who is Uncle Milty, who is, because you only had 4 channels or 3 networks. It's much, much better today, but we really do miss those kind of cultural connections. If I said...
We're all on the long tail with these little niche-y interests.
I say, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. You know what that means. And I wonder if it's the same today with young folks. I don't think it is for that reason.
Yeah. So I think that we should at least be happy that we do have a lot of different spokespeople who are coming at the challenges that confront free societies in different ways. So I love that Jordan Peterson is out there. I love that we get to work with someone, Magatte Wade, who is originally from Senegal, and is like a super powerful speaker that takes her messages and gets applauded at Berkeley, even though she's all about entrepreneurship. Johan Norberg is an amazing Swedish economist that does these documentaries with Free to Choose Network. Yep. There's a lot of great people out there, whether they can command the conversation the way that Milton Friedman did with a really disruptive PBS video. Like those days are probably gone, but it just means that we have more fun battles to fight.
It means that there's an opening for a young person or young people to jump in there and disrupt it, and I'm looking forward to it. All right, we've been doing this way too long, and we've been drinking bourbon, so I'm going to switch gears just for a minute here. Purely personal. You got some great kids.
Thank you.
You have some interesting taste in music. I want to talk, who's your favorite band?
Interesting question. I probably go to Big Star. Do you know Big Star?
No.
Okay, they're sort of an early 70s Memphis band, out of touch with what you think of when you think of Memphis. They're sort of more Beatles influenced, and then had sort of a nervous breakdown and became influential to a lot of the Replacements and all the
For those who don't get
stuff.
it, you've got great musical taste. Terrible taste in just about everything else. But I mean, you've got this incredible depth of music. So I'm always curious about that, because I don't care for any music that isn't at least 30 years old.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
It's so funny. So I was thinking about this the other day that I think there's probably as much good music being made as ever, but it's not consequential the way that it used to seem consequential. Because I think lots of things are now kind of...
Do you think it's consequential to our, we have daughters kind of the same age. Yours a little younger. For them, is it consequential? They see Taylor Swift and they go, this is a social thing. I came in after the Beatles. I could tell that was a social thing.
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin was a social thing. Stones were a social thing.
Public Enemy was a social thing back in 1989.
The Clash, Sex Pistols. I mean, you could go into all those and go, this is more than music. This is disruption. I just don't see disruption. And it's partly because I'm old and I don't care for that. If I hear anything that sounds like a dance track, I'm gone. Or all these these effeminate young guys who are doing these whiny little emo songs. I don't do it.
Well, here's something that's interesting. I wanted to learn more about this, but recently China has forbidden sort of effeminate pop. And I think that they. The
only thing I like about China, right there.
But they said really explicitly, that this is going against like the values that we need for a sort of muscular, a nation that will lead in this century. They didn't like. I guess a lot of it comes from Korea. These sort of boy bands, the K-pop stuff. Yeah. So I was trying to be generous and say, but maybe I'm just wrong about this. Maybe there is still disruptive culture. Actually, let me plug one other thing. At the big Freedom Dinner that Atlas Network hosts annually, this year we're going to have the Cuban rappers that did the Patria y Vida, which translates as homeland and life, which is kind of a rebut to the old Castro refrain, homeland or death. They were inspirations behind the uprisings we saw this past June and July in Cuba, and we'll have them on stage at Freedom Dinner in Miami. So I hope you've booked your tickets.
Which should be nice to get an invitation to one of those dinners. So
they're still out there.
I hate the effeminate pop crap, but then again, I look at Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Insane and that gender bender stuff way back when, and go, that was somehow cool, and this somehow stinks, which just means I'm turning into my father.
Yeah. Well, I remember being so disappointed because I am kind of like an indie rock snob that looked down upon, Fog Hat and Deep Purple and all that. And it turned out that was that the Scorpions were some of the bands that all those Eastern Europeans that were rebelling against communism, they loved the Scorpions.
Really?
It's terrible taste, but I guess wherever you find it.
Joan Jett is okay. What was it? T-Rex. Yeah. T-Rex, another glam. Gary Glitter. I mean, all these glam weird stuff.
I think last year you heard at my house a T-Rex version of Summertime Blues that you enjoyed.
I now put it on. I have one playlist, and I add a song here and there. And there it is. And it's such a great, awesome Eddie Cochran rockabilly, because that's my period. I just love that stuff. I love big band swing stuff. Basically, you have to be dead for me to like what you do, which is why I'm not going to read this until you're done, and then I'm going to love it.
You'll appreciate it.
Thanks for everything you do. It's so important, and I don't think a lot of people know about the Atlas Network. They should. They should write you a check. It promotes liberty in places. And by the way, those places that need liberty might be the place that you or your kid have to go to in a decade or two.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it'd be great if we can save this country, but a diversification strategy would be pretty good. So
if you had to go to one country, where would you go?
Well, it's so funny.
By the way, I've asked Tom Palmer this. I've asked everybody in your world this.
I'll say two things. I love Guatemala, where they have the great Universidad Francisco Marroquín, the best institution of higher education I'm aware of. It is worth going. And
I know you guys do a lot of events there, but you've never invited me there either.
Okay, well, we got to bring you along because my wife Stephanie will take anybody to Guatemala. She loves it so much. I've always been enamored by New Zealand, the home of our board chair, Debbie Gibbs.
Debbie Gibbs, who, by the way, is just a powerhouse lady.
She's a powerhouse lady, and she used to manage amazing bands from New Zealand, which is part of my attraction. But they also score tops in our Global Index of Economic Mentality, despite having a nominally socialist president.
Because there's so few of them, and they've disarmed the people.
They have disarmed the people, and they're crazy on the lockdowns. But economic freedom, they got right after some major reforms in the 1980s that Debbie's dad was a part of. So anyway, if I was going to flee long term, I would be to New Zealand. Are you coming with me, John?
Fortunately, both of us are so close to death, we don't need to worry about that. It's going to be our kids' problem.
Just going to ride it out from here with our whiskey. And
Brad, thanks for everything you do.
Thanks, John.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.